Dragonite, one of the most iconic and beloved Pokemon. It was designed to perfectly toe the line as not only being this cool and edgy monster, but also a huggable and lovable one. As the franchise's first ever Pseudo-Legendary and the only Dragon type in Generation 1, it had this aura of excellence surrounding it. Even in Pokemon media, it was portrayed as this incredibly strong beast. Mewtwo, the perfect Pokemon lifeform, entrusted one as his own personal messenger. Lance, the strongest member of the Elite Four, even had 3 of them. One would naturally think that Dragonite would have had years of success in competitive Pokemon as well. However, it wouldn't be until the release of Scarlet and Violet where Dragonite would actually have any competitive success. So why exactly did it take 20 years for Dragonite to finally become good? Well, it's time for a hit of nostalgia, because to answer that question, let's first go through Dragonite's entire history in the official competitive Pokemon circuit. Official competitive Pokemon tournaments as we know them today began in Generation 4 with the release of Diamond and Pearl. Since these tournaments are played using double battles, Dragonite unfortunately suffered an inherent nerf right from the start. Its strongest physical Dragon-type move, Outrage, is incredibly strong in single battles. Sure, it comes with a few drawbacks, but in double battles, it gets even worse. You can't even choose which of your opponent's 2 Pokemon to target with the attack. It's chosen completely randomly. This meant that players who valued reliability would have to downgrade to Dragon Claw, which has significantly less power than Outrage. Dragonite also couldn't take advantage of one of the best setup moves in Dragon Dance, nearly as much in double battles. Not only can setup Pokemon just be double targeted by both of the opponent's Pokemon, knocking it out, but its signature extreme speed didn't need a speed boost. It would already move before the opponent attacked. Even though Dragonite had a high attack stat, boosting its attack only one stage couldn't give it the power it needed to outright KO things after a single boost, due to Dragon Claw and Extreme Speed's mediocre base power. Dragonite would have benefited so much more had it learned a setup move like Swords Dance, where it could gain 2 stages of increased attack and bypass its own mediocre speed stat with high-powered extreme speeds. To make up for these nerfs that Dragonite got, going from single battles to double battles, its ability, Inner Focus, a normally useless ability in single battles, was actually quite useful in double battles, granting it immunity to flinches from some of the most common moves in the game, like Fake Out and Rock Slide. However, even aside from Dragonite being far weaker in double battles than in single battles, there was one more huge problem for it in Generation 4. The official circuit back then was still in its infancy, so in an archaic rule that has long since been done away with, Pokemon could not be used if they were above level 50. But Dragonite could only be obtained through evolution at level 55. This meant that Pokemon like Dragonite, Tyranitar, and Heatran, prior to the release of Pokemon Platinum anyway, could not be used. Or that would have been the case until Toys R Us of all places held this in-person event where they gave away a level 50 Dragonite for just one random weekend. Because of this, Dragonite was actually legal to use in both the 2008 and 2009 official tournaments. But this event Dragonite had one big downside. It could only be obtained with the mild nature, which boosts special attack and lowers defense. Not a very good nature for a Pokemon who wants to be a bulky physical attacker. On top of that, because this was an event Dragonite, it would have completely random IVs, making its stats a lot worse compared to breedable Pokemon. Bottle Caps, an easily obtainable item that can increase a Pokemon's IVs, didn't exist yet. At the time, manipulating the game's RNG by using a stopwatch in order to get perfect IVs had also yet to be discovered by the Pokemon community. When it came to alternative Dragon types players could use, Salamence, which had the same typing as Dragonite, a better ability in Intimidate, but was breedable so you could easily get flawless IVs in the ideal nature, Latios, who, even without flawless IVs, you could at least reset for the right nature quite easily, and Garchomp, who did the physical attacking bulky Dragon type role a lot better, all completely outclassed this event Dragonite. All of this combined meant that Dragonite didn't even see a minute of competitive play in Generation 4. Generation 5, however, brought with it a very notable buff for Dragonite. Hidden abilities were introduced to the franchise, granting Dragonite Multiscale as an additional ability. Multiscale was incredibly powerful, as whenever Dragonite was at full HP, it could no longer be one-hit KO'd by Dragon or Ice-type moves, thanks in combination to its impressive defenses as well as Multiscale cutting incoming damage in half. However, Dragonite would still lag behind its Dragon-type competition. Latios, Salamence, and Garchomp remained top threats, and the newly introduced Pseudo-Legendary Hydreigon, which I'm a huge fan of ever since I used it to win back-to-back World Championships in the Black and White era, was also incredibly powerful. In 2012 though, Dragonite was able to reach the top 4 at UK Nationals, on a team with fellow Dragon-type Latios. This was a format dominated by the Double Dragon strategy, but despite many players using 2 Dragon types on a single team, that result was the only respectable finish Dragonite would have this generation. Generation 6 brought a lot of love to older Pokemon, with the introduction of Mega Evolutions in Pokemon X and Y. A lot of players' favorite original Pokemon, like Alakazam, Gengar, and Gyarados, were recipients of new, incredibly powerful forms. Dragonite's previously mentioned competition, Latios, Salamence, and Garchomp, all received these Mega Evolutions. Even other Pseudo-Legendaries, like Tyranitar and Metagross, were recipients of Mega Evolution as well. However, Dragonite was left behind, yet again. It was almost cruel, the lack of attention Dragonite was being given by Game Freak. If any of the Pseudo-Legendary Pokemon needed a buff, it was Dragonite. Every other Pseudo-Legendary was already among the absolute top tier of competitive Pokemon. But things didn't stop there. Generation 6 also introduced a new 18th type to the Pokemon franchise. Enter the Fairy type, which was created with the hope that it would begin to end the reign of Dragon-type dominance in competitive play. The new Fairy type would be immune to Dragon-type attacks, and threaten KOs back with new strong super effective moves like Moonblast and Play Rough. Dragons would still remain among the strongest Pokemon in the game this generation, but their centralizing effect would begin to fade as the generations progressed. As for Dragonite specifically, it did get a little bit stronger, thanks to the new held item, Weakness Policy. Weakness Policy synergized really well with Multiscale, as Dragonite could easily survive even 4 times super effective Ice-type moves and get a 2-stage boost to both its attack and special attack. Unfortunately, this strategy relied too much on the opponent's ignorance, as it was easy to play around the Weakness Policy and Multiscale combination by simply breaking the Multiscale first with a non-super effective hit, and then KOing Dragonite afterwards with a super effective move so that it would never get the Weakness Policy boost. Speaking of opponents playing around Multiscale, 2 of the most popular new Mega Evolutions, Mega Kangaskhan and Mega Mawile, were even capable of one-hit KOing Dragonite through Multiscale. Kangaskhan's parental bond allowed it to break Multiscale with the first Ice Punch, taking over half of Dragonite's HP, and the follow-up Ice Punch from the baby Kangaskhan was then able to finish it off. Mawile had Intimidate, lowering Dragonite's attack, was immune to Dragon-type attacks and resisted extreme speed, and upon Mega Evolving, even had a chance to one-hit KO Dragonite through Multiscale with Play Rough, thanks to its insane ability, Huge Power. Mega Kangaskhan being so prevalent in competitive play also led to an increase in usage of Will-O-Wisp and Rocky Helmet to serve as counterplay, and Landorus Therian, which, like Kangaskhan, was also incredibly common, led to a rise in Pokemon with Ice Beam. None of this spelled good news for players trying to use Dragonite. Like before, it was simply outclassed. It would see a lone top 4 finish at the 2014 Australian Nationals, but that was it. Generation 7, with the release of Sun and Moon, didn't give Dragonite any notable buffs. However, this generation would actually feature Dragonite's biggest highlight reel throughout competitive Pokemon's entire history. Dragonite still wasn't a strong or successful Pokemon, but if you've ever tuned in to the official broadcast of the competitive Pokemon circuit, you may already be familiar with what's been dubbed competitive Pokemon's greatest comeback, which featured a Dragonite winning in a seemingly insurmountable 1 vs 4. Despite the impression that that match might give off, Dragonite would only manage to achieve a few top cuts throughout both 2017 and 2018, thanks to two moves that would set it apart from its competition. Skydrop, which was great for assisting its allied Pokemon in setting up and KOing the defenseless Pokemon as it was freed from Skydrop the very next turn, and Safeguard, another good supportive move to protect both Dragonite and the rest of its team from status conditions like Spore and Will-O-Wisp. Dragonite also had access to the usual Extreme Speed to pick off low HP Pokemon before they could move, and Draco Meteor and Flamethrower to KO Garchomp and Kartana, who are quite popular this generation. More niche options were Roar to stop Extreme Evo Boost Eevee, Belly Drum Snorlax, and Trick Room setups, and Bulldoze to lower the opponent's speed while giving an allied Clear Body Metagross a weakness policy boost without dropping its speed. However, Salamence had access to all of these moves too, other than Extreme Speed, Skydrop, and Safeguard. And it had one of the best abilities in all of competitive Pokemon, Intimidate. If you've seen my previous video on how Arcanine has managed to avoid power creep for 20 years, then you might already be able to guess what led some players to justify using Dragonite over Salamence despite this. Arcanine had one of the most dominant seasons of competitive Pokemon ever this generation, as it was on around 70% of all teams in Sun and Moon. Because of this, players were likely to already have an Intimidator on their team in Arcanine, so they didn't really need a second one in Salamence. And picking Dragonite due to its better bulk and access to unique moves like Extreme Speed and Skydrop made a lot of sense. Even though I am kind of hyping up Dragonite here a bit, and like I mentioned, it did have a handful of top cuts at regional championships that year, it would still spend this generation hovering around the 50th most used Pokemon and still had less success than Salamence. Dragonite would ultimately leave Generation 7 still in search of its first ever tournament victory. Generation 8 introduced Dynamax, which actually served as a buff to physical flying types that lacked good flying type moves, and that was Dragonite to a T, whose best physical flying type move was the mediocre dual Wing Beat. Pokemon like Landorus Therian and Thundurus Incarnate would become top tier threats, all thanks to Max Airstream, which would turn all flying type moves when Dynamaxed into incredibly powerful attacks that would also boost both of your current Pokemon's speed by one stage. This turned normally useless moves like Fly and Bounce into extremely strong moves once Dynamaxed. Inner Focus, Dragonite's other ability, was also reworked. It now protected Pokemon from Intimidate as well, preventing their attack from falling. While this was a huge buff to the ability, Dragonite already had an incredibly strong ability in Multiscale, but at least this gave players a choice between two strong abilities depending on whether they preferred more defense or offense. However, Dragonite wouldn't be able to take advantage of these buffs, as it was unfortunately a victim of the infamous Dexit. It was not included in the Sword and Shield native Pokedex, and thus could not be used until the DLC released it into the game. By that time, not only was Dragonite outclassed by the aforementioned legendary genies, but the official competitive circuit was put on an indefinite pause due to the worldwide pandemic. Thus, Dragonite left Generation 8 still looking for its first tournament victory. And that brings us to where we are today. Generation 9, with the release of Scarlet and Violet, gave us the Terastallization mechanic, allowing Pokemon to change their type to any type in the game. This was absolutely huge for Dragonite. Throughout competitive Pokemon's history, I've been comparing it to other Dragon and Flying types, showing how it was simply outclassed by the alternative options. But now that Pokemon could change their type to whatever they wanted, Dragonite was no longer in competition with any of the aforementioned Pokemon. It could focus solely on its niche, a bulky, strong, extreme speed user. It could utilize a normal type Terastallization, not only removing all of its numerous type weaknesses as a Dragon and Flying type, but becoming a normal type would also give Extreme Speed a huge 50% boost in damage, since it would now receive the same type attack bonus. When combined with Chien-Pao, which lowered the defense stat of all Pokemon on the field when active, Choice Band Terra Normal Extreme Speed was able to KO a lot of Pokemon before they could even move. As an alternative way of utilizing Dragonite, some players would even take inspiration from Generation 8 and use a flying Terra type for their Dragonite, giving it reliable flying type damage with the move Terra Blast. This would also remove its Dragon and Fairy type weaknesses while reducing its 4x Ice weakness to only a 2x weakness. Because Dragonite was naturally a flying type, Terastallization in this way would also give it a further 33% increase in power to its flying type Terra Blast. Dragonite, for the first time ever, was one of the strongest and most used Pokemon in the entire game. In just the first year of Scarlet and Violet, it captured 5 regional level championships and 1 international championship, alongside countless top cuts at every level of event from local Premier Challenge to even the World Championships. It's honestly crazy seeing a Pokemon go from competitive obscurity, having not won a single tournament over the course of 20 years, to one of the stars of a generation. It's not even like it was on the back of a Mega Evolution, Gigantamax form, or a Signature Z move. It was solely due to it being able to change its type, separating itself from the vast amount of Dragon and Flying type competition, while simultaneously improving upon its unique niche that set it apart from every other Pokemon in the first place. I think we can all agree that this is a fitting outcome for Dragonite. It deserved to be in the competitive spotlight, at least for a moment. And for many Pokemon fans, the image of Dragonite delivering mail from Mewtwo is just iconic. So if any move were going to bring Dragonite glory, Extreme Speed is the perfect move to have done it.